A man in his 70s sat quietly outside a small coffee shop, smiling as he checked the balance in his investment account. There was nothing extraordinary about him. He didn't own a private jet, he never founded a billion-dollar company, and his wealth continued to grow every single day, even while he slept. Across the city lived Daniel, a 22-year-old who believed he was doing everything right. He worked hard, showed up on time, rarely missed a shift, and dreamed about becoming financially free someday. But every month followed the exact same pattern. His salary arrived, he felt rich for a few days, then the bills started piling up. Rent disappeared first, followed by transportation, food, subscriptions, and countless small purchases that never felt expensive in the moment. Before long, he was staring at an almost empty bank account, wondering where all the money had gone. One evening, after another exhausting day at work, Daniel decided to walk home instead of paying for a ride. As he crossed a quiet park, he noticed an elderly man feeding birds with a calm smile that seemed almost impossible to explain. The man didn't look wealthy, but he looked free. He wasn't checking his phone every few seconds, he wasn't rushing anywhere, and he certainly didn't carry the stress that Daniel felt every single day. Before Daniel could continue walking, someone familiar stepped out from behind a nearby tree carrying a tiny green briefcase. It was Bob. His round white face lit up with a grin as he looked at Daniel and then at the old man sitting peacefully nearby. Bob didn't begin with a lecture or a complicated financial chart. Instead, he bent down, scooped up a tiny snowball resting on the edge of the path, and placed it gently in Daniel's hands. Then he pointed toward the top of a nearby hill. "Imagine pushing this snowball down that hill," Bob said. Daniel shrugged and imagined it rolling slowly across the snow. At first, nothing remarkable happened. The snowball remained small, barely changing size. But as it continued rolling, it began collecting more snow. Soon it doubled in size. Then it tripled. Before long, it had become so massive that no one watching from the bottom would believe it had started as something that fit inside one hand. Bob smiled because Daniel had just witnessed one of the most powerful financial lessons on earth without seeing a single dollar. Bob could read the doubt on Daniel's face, so he opened his briefcase and placed a single $100 bill on the table between them. "Let's pretend this is your investment," Bob said. "Now imagine it earns 10% in 1 year." Daniel quickly calculated the answer. "That's easy," he replied. "I'd have $110. Bob nodded. "Correct. Now tell me what happens next year." Daniel answered confidently. "Another $10. Bob shook his head with a smile. "That's where almost everyone makes their first mistake." Bob explained that after the first year, Daniel no longer owned $100. He now owned $110. That meant the next 10% wasn't calculated on the original amount, it was calculated on the new amount. He imagined the investment continuing year after year without interruption. 5 years passed. Then 10. Then 20. Suddenly the numbers that once seemed tiny had multiplied into something much larger. By the time 40 years had gone by, the original investment had become many times bigger than Daniel ever expected. Nothing magical had happened. No lottery ticket. No risky gamble. Just time doing what time does best, rewarding patience. Bob picked up an acorn from beneath a nearby oak tree and placed it beside the snowball. "People love planting flowers because they bloom quickly," he said. "Very few people enjoy planting oak trees because they take decades to reach their full size. But generations later, no one remembers the flowers. Everyone remembers the tree." Daniel looked up at the enormous branches stretching across the park and finally understood the comparison. Wealth wasn't built in dramatic moments. It was built in thousands of ordinary days that looked completely unimportant while they were happening. As they continued walking, Bob pointed toward a construction site where workers were laying a foundation for a future skyscraper. From the outside, it looked painfully slow. Trucks delivered concrete. Workers measured the same areas repeatedly. Weeks passed without a single floor appearing above ground. Anyone passing by might assume nothing was happening. Yet the engineers knew something everyone else ignored. The taller the building would become, the stronger the foundation had to be. Most people walked away before the skyscraper ever appeared. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about his own life. He remembered every expensive phone upgrade, every unnecessary purchase, every weekend when he told himself he deserved to spend because he had worked hard. None of those decisions seemed important at the time, but together they had stolen years that his future investments could have been quietly growing. As the sun began to set, he reached into his briefcase one final time and pulled out 2 identical seeds. They looked exactly the same, yet Bob claimed one tiny difference between them would eventually create a gap worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Daniel laughed because that sounded impossible. How could 2 identical seeds produce completely different futures? Bob simply handed one seed to Daniel and pointed toward the horizon. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'm going to introduce you to 2 friends who earn the exact same salary, work the exact same job, and live in the exact same city." Bob reached into his briefcase and pulled out 2 identical notebooks. On the cover of one was written Emma, and on the other was written Jake. "These 2 people are fictional," Bob explained, "but their story happens every single day in the real world." Emma and Jake graduated from university together. They were hired by the same company, earned exactly the same salary, rented apartments in the same neighborhood, and even shared similar dreams of becoming financially independent someday. From the outside, there was almost no difference between them. Friends assumed their futures would look almost identical because their lives had started in almost exactly the same place. During their first month of work, Emma made one decision that didn't seem exciting. She decided to invest just $200 every month before spending anything else. She didn't wait until she felt rich. She didn't promise herself she would start later. She treated investing the same way she treated paying rent. It happened first. The money left her account automatically every month, and because she never saw it sitting in her bank account, she slowly stopped missing it. Jake, however, had a different plan. He wasn't careless with money. In fact, his reasoning sounded completely logical. He wanted to enjoy his 20s before worrying about investing. Every time someone mentioned saving, he smiled and said, "I'll start when I'm earning more." After all, what difference could a few years possibly make? He wanted a nicer phone, better clothes, more vacations, and the freedom to enjoy life while he was still young. Investing could wait. 5 years passed almost without either of them noticing. Emma's investment account had quietly grown every single month. Some years the market went up. Other years it fell. She didn't panic because Bob had once told her that time mattered far more than short-term headlines. She simply continued investing month after month. Jake finally reached a higher salary and proudly announced that he was now ready to begin investing. He started contributing exactly the same amount Emma invested every month. In his mind, he had only delayed a little. Bob looked at Daniel and asked, "Who do you think ends up with more money when they retire?" Daniel shrugged. "Emma, probably. But Jake should catch up eventually because they're investing the same amount now." Bob smiled because that answer was exactly what most people expect. Years continued passing. Promotions came and went. Both bought homes. Both faced unexpected bills. Both experienced recessions, celebrations, weddings, and difficult seasons. Life treated them surprisingly equally. Yet something invisible kept happening beneath the surface. Emma's earliest investments had been working for decades. Every dollar she invested at 22 wasn't just growing. It was producing new dollars that also began growing. It was like planting hundreds of tiny workers inside her account, each one hiring more workers every year. By the time both reached 60, the difference was staggering.